The cold was a familiar enemy. It seeped into Serenith's bones, a constant gnawing ache that mirrored the emptiness in her soul. She stood at the edge of the clearing, a ghost in the vibrant celebration of her own personal hell. The fabric of the servant's tunic she wore was thin and coarse, offering no protection against the biting wind that swept down from the northern peaks. It was a deliberate cruelty, one of many she had endured, her skin pale as winter snow, and her hair, a cascade of pure white, made her an easy target for the scorn of her pack. She was an albino, an omega, and today, she was the rejected mate of the Alpha celebrating his union with another. Alpha Rovan stood on the ceremonial platform, his arm wrapped possessively around Cyrilda. He was everything an Alpha was meant to be. Broad-shouldered, radiating power, with hair as black as a raven's wing. Cyrilda, beside him, was his perfect match in their pack's eyes, golden-haired, fierce, and from a strong bloodline. They laughed, a sound that grated on Serenith's raw nerves. Rovan's eyes, chips of hard obsidian, swept the crowd and landed on her. A smirk twisted his lips. It was a look she knew well. It was the look of a man reminding a dog of its place. He had orchestrated this. Forcing her to serve at his wedding feast was the final crushing stone placed upon the cairn of her humiliation. Her rejection had been a spectacle. 6 months ago, on the night of her presentation, Rovan had taken one look at her colorless eyes and snow-white wolf form, and sneered. "The moon goddess has cursed me," he had declared for all to hear. "I reject this pale omen, this weak-blooded Omega, Serenith." The words had shattered something inside her, a fragile piece of hope she hadn't even known she possessed. The pack had echoed his disgust. Her parents were long dead, lost to a rogue attack years ago, leaving her with no one to defend her. She was a flaw, a stain on the vibrant tapestry of the Blackwood pack. Now she was less than a shadow. She moved through the throng of celebrating wolves, refilling goblets of mead, her eyes fixed on the ground. Every brush against her was a jolt of pain, every whispered comment a fresh lash against her spirit. "The cursed one," they murmured. Rovan was right to cast her aside. "Look at her, she'll bring bad luck to the Union." The words were like tiny, sharp pebbles, wearing her down until she felt she was nothing but dust. She wanted to crumble, to let the wind scatter her remains until nothing was left. A sudden commotion near the edge of the forest drew her attention. A ripple of alarm spread through the crowd. Warriors shifted, their hands moving instinctively to the knives at their belts. Rovan's voice, sharp and commanding, cut through the festive noise. "What is it? Rogues?" His new bride, Cyrilda, clung to his arm, her perfect face a mask of annoyed concern. "Alpha, something came through the wards," a guard shouted, pointing a trembling finger towards the dense thicket of pines. "It's massive, and it's bleeding." Curiosity, a dangerous and long-dormant emotion, stirred within Serenith. She edged closer, using her near-invisible status to slip between larger bodies. Through a gap in the crowd, she saw it. A wolf. But it was unlike any she had ever seen. It was colossal, its fur the color of midnight smoke, stained darker still with blood that steamed in the frigid air. A massive gash ran along its flank, and its breaths came in ragged, shallow pants. Its eyes, however, were what held her captive. They were the color of liquid silver, blazing with a defiant fire even as its body failed. The warriors of her pack formed a cautious circle around the wounded animal. They saw a threat, a monster to be put down. Serenith saw only agony. She saw a creature brought to its knees, alone and cornered. It was a reflection of her own soul, and a fierce, inexplicable protectiveness surged through her. It was madness. She was an Omega, a weakling. What could she possibly do? Rovan stepped forward, a cruel smile playing on his lips. It seems a beast has come to offer a wedding gift. Its pelt. His warriors laughed, raising their spears. The great wolf snarled, a low, rumbling sound that promised death despite its injuries. It tried to stand, but its legs buckled, and it collapsed back into the snow, a pained whine escaping its throat. Something inside Serenith broke. It was not the fragile thing of hope that had shattered before, but the cold, hard shell of her despair. She could not stand by and watch another creature suffer for the entertainment of those who had caused her so much pain. Before she could think, before her rational mind could scream at her for her suicidal foolishness, she was moving. She darted through the circle of warriors, ignoring their surprised shouts. She threw herself into the snow in front of the giant wolf, spreading her arms wide to shield its body with her own. "Stop!" she cried, her voice thin but clear in the sudden silence. "Don't you see? He's hurt. He needs help, not death." Rovan stared at her, his face a thundercloud of fury and disbelief. "Serenith! Get out of the way, you pathetic fool. That is a rogue, a monster. It will tear you apart." "No," she whispered, her gaze locked on the silver eyes of the wolf before her. The fire in them had softened, replaced by a flicker of stunned surprise. The immense head lifted slightly and a wet nose nudged her hand. There was no aggression, only a desperate plea for help. A connection, primal and deep, sparked between them. She felt its pain as if it were her own. "He's not a monster." "I am your alpha, and I command you to move," Rovan roared, his alpha command washing over her. It was a physical force, designed to compel obedience. Every Omega instinct in her body screamed at her to obey, to grovel, to submit. But the agony emanating from the wolf behind her was a stronger call. She trembled, tears streaming down her face from the effort, but she held her ground. "I will not," she said, her voice shaking but resolute. The clearing erupted in gasps. An Omega defying a direct alpha command was unheard of. It was a death sentence. Cyrilda's face was twisted in a mask of pure hatred. "Kill them both, Rovan! Put the cursed wretch and the beast out of their misery!" Rovan's eyes blazed with a murderous light. He took a step forward, his hand raising to strike her. But before he could move, a chorus of howls, deep and resonant and utterly terrifying, echoed from the surrounding forest. It was not the sound of a scattered rogue pack. It was the disciplined, chilling cry of a military legion. The ground itself seemed to vibrate with the power of it. Warriors, far larger and more heavily armed than any of Rovan's men, burst from the trees. They were clad in black leather armor marked with the crest of a silver wolf's head. They moved with silent, deadly efficiency, forming a perimeter that dwarfed the Blackwood warriors. Rovan and his men froze, their arrogance melting away into stark terror. These were not mere pack warriors. These were royal guards. A male stepped forward, his presence commanding absolute authority. He was older, his face etched with battle scars, and his eyes held the cold, hard certainty of a veteran commander. A silver wolf crest, larger than the others, was emblazoned on his chest. He was a beta, but he carried more power in his little finger than Rovan held in his entire body. His gaze swept over the scene, taking in the cowering pack, the defiant Omega, and the bleeding wolf on the ground. His eyes widened in horror when he saw the massive animal. "Your Majesty!" the beta cried, rushing forward and dropping to one knee beside the wolf. He ignored Serenith and everyone else completely, his focus solely on the injured creature. "Your Majesty?" The words echoed in Serenith's mind, making no sense. She looked from the kneeling beta to the great wolf, whose silver eyes were now fixed on her with an intensity that stole her breath. A strange warmth was spreading through her, a tingling sensation that started where his nose had touched her hand. The beta, whose name she would later learn was Gideon, looked up, his eyes filled with a rage so profound it was a tangible force. He glared at Rovan. "What have you done? You dare to raise weapons against the Alpha King?" Alpha King. The title fell into the stunned silence like a thunderclap. King Theron, the Shadow Wolf King. Ruler of all the Northern Territories, a figure of myth and legend, so powerful that other alphas were said to tremble in his presence. And he was lying bleeding in the snow at their feet. Rovan's face went bone white. Cyrilda looked as if she might faint. Serenith's heart hammered against her ribs. She had just shielded the most powerful wolf in the world with her own worthless body. She had defied her alpha for him. She was surely dead. King Theron let out a low groan. A shimmering light enveloped his massive form, a wave of palpable energy that forced everyone back a step. The black fur receded, bones shifted and reformed with sickening cracks and pops. Where the colossal wolf had been, a man now lay. He was just as large in his human form, with broad shoulders and long limbs. His hair was as black as his wolf's pelt, and his skin, though pale from blood loss, was unblemished, save for the deep, weeping wound in his side. He was unconscious, but even in that state, he radiated an aura of absolute power that choked the air. Gideon barked orders. "Healers, now! Secure the perimeter. No one leaves this clearing." He turned his furious gaze back to Rovan. "You will answer for this, Alpha Rovan. You will answer to the king for your pacts, inhospitality." The word was laced with deadly venom, but Serenith barely heard him. Her world had narrowed to the unconscious man on the ground. The strange warmth inside her was intensifying, becoming a roaring fire. It was a pull, an undeniable connection that hummed along every nerve. It felt like a song she had been waiting her entire life to hear, a melody that her very soul recognized. She stumbled forward, her hand reaching out instinctively towards him. "Stay away from him, Omega!" Gideon snapped, moving to block her path. Before his hand could touch her, King Theron's eyes flew open. They were the same liquid silver as his wolf's, and they were fixed solely on her. The world seemed to fade away. The noise, the fear, the cold, it all vanished. There was only the silver gaze of the king and the overwhelming sense of rightness that flooded her being. A single word, spoken in a voice rough with pain but resonant with power, echoed in the silent clearing. It was a word that sealed her fate and shattered her world for the second time in a single day. Mine. The word hung in the air, electric and irrefutable. It was not a question or a request. It was a statement of fact, a claim laid upon her very soul. Serenith froze, her hand still outstretched. The warmth that had been building inside her erupted into a conflagration, a wildfire of sensation she had never imagined possible. It was terrifying and exhilarating all at once. It felt like coming home to a place she had never known existed. Gideon, the stern beta, looked from his king to Serenith, his jaw slack with astonishment. The other royal guards murmured in shock. In the crowd, Rovan's face, which had been pale with fear, was now mottled with an ugly, disbelieving rage. Cyrilda looked at Serenith with an expression of pure, venomous jealousy. King Theron pushed himself up on one elbow, his silver eyes never leaving hers. The pain of the movement was evident on his face, but his gaze was unwavering. "You," he said, his voice stronger now. "You protected me." Serenith couldn't find her voice. She could only nod, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. Was this a dream? A hallucination brought on by the cold and her own despair? How could this be happening? "She defied her alpha for you, Your Majesty," Gideon supplied, his tone a mixture of awe and disbelief, as he looked at Serenith with new eyes. "She placed herself between you and their spears." A slow smile touched Theron's lips, a sight so rare and powerful it seemed to make the very air grow warmer. "Did she now?" He extended a hand towards her, his fingers long and calloused. "Come here." It was a command, but it held none of the brutal force of Rovan's. It was an invitation, a gentle pull on the new, vibrant thread that now connected them. She took a hesitant step forward, then another, until she was kneeling in the snow beside him. She was acutely aware of every eye in the clearing fixed upon her, the worthless Omega kneeling before the Alpha King. "This cannot be," Rovan snarled, finding his voice at last. His fear was being rapidly replaced by his wounded pride. "She is nothing. A cursed, weak-blooded Omega from my pack. I rejected her. She is worthless." Theron's smile vanished. His head turned slowly, and he pinned Rovan with a glare so cold and potent that the younger Alpha physically recoiled. The temperature in the clearing seemed to drop 20 degrees. "You rejected her?" Theron's voice was dangerously soft. "You had this treasure in your pack, and you cast her aside because your eyes are too blind to see true worth?" He looked back at Serenith, his expression softening once more. "He calls you weak, yet you showed more courage than any of his armed warriors. He calls you cursed, yet the moon goddess has clearly blessed you with a compassionate heart. You, little wolf, are the furthest thing from worthless." Each word was a healing balm on her wounded spirit. He was defending her. Him, the king. Theron's gaze fell upon her pale hair and skin. A flicker of understanding and something akin to wonder crossed his features. He gently reached out and tucked a strand of white hair behind her ear. His touch sent a jolt of pure lightning through her. "They scorn you for the color of the moon," he murmured, more to himself than to her. "Fools. They worship the goddess but fail to recognize her mark when it is right before them." Serenith felt tears welling in her eyes, but for the first time in her life, they were not tears of pain or sorrow. They were tears of overwhelming, incomprehensible relief. To be seen, truly seen, for the first time. It was more than she had ever dared to dream of. "The bond," she whispered, the words tumbling out before she could stop them. "I can feel it." "As can I," Theron confirmed, his thumb gently stroking her cheek. "It settled the moment you stood to defend me. The bravest, most beautiful soul I have ever encountered. My mate." He said the last two words with such reverence, such absolute certainty, that it left no room for doubt. "No!" Cyrilda shrieked, her composure finally shattering. "It's a trick. She's a witch. She has enchanted him. Rovan, do something." Rovan, goaded by his new mate and his own boiling humiliation, took a foolish step forward. "She is of my pack," he declared, trying to inject his voice with his lost authority. "Whatever bond you think you feel, it is my right to—" He never finished the sentence. Theron was on his feet in a blur of motion, the grievous wound in his side seemingly forgotten. He stood between Serenith and Rovan, a living wall of pure, untamed power. The Alpha King's aura slammed into the clearing, a physical pressure that brought lesser wolves to their knees. Rovan choked, his face turning purple as he clawed at his throat, pinned in place by the king's invisible might. "You have no rights where she is concerned," Theron growled, his voice a low thunder that promised annihilation. "You forfeited them when you threw her away. She is mine now. She is my queen. And you, little Alpha, have just insulted your queen. You will kneel." The last word was an inescapable command. Rovan's legs buckled, and he crashed to his knees in the snow before Serenith, his body trembling uncontrollably. Cyrilda cried out in horror. The entire Blackwood pack stared, their faces masks of terror and awe. The rejected Omega, the pack outcast, was now the fated mate of the Alpha King. She was their Luna Queen. Theron kept his crushing pressure on Rovan for a long moment before releasing it. The younger Alpha gasped for air, slumping in the snow like a puppet with its strings cut. Theron paid him no more mind, turning his full attention back to Serenith. "Healers," he commanded, his voice returning to its normal, authoritative tone. "Tend to my mate. She is chilled to the bone." He shrugged off his own heavy, fur-lined cloak and wrapped it around her shoulders. It was warm from his body heat and smelled of pine, winter, and power. It enveloped her completely, a shield against the cold and the prying eyes of her former pack. "Gideon," Theron said, his voice sharp, "we are leaving. Prepare my transport and take a full accounting of this pack. I want to know everything about them, their strengths, their weaknesses, and every transgression they have ever committed against her." His silver eyes flickered towards Serenith, who was trembling inside the warm cocoon of his cloak. "There will be a reckoning." The journey to the royal citadel was a blur for Serenith. She was bundled into a large, heated carriage, sitting on plush velvet cushions across from the king himself. Royal healers had tended to his wound, a clean cut from a poisoned silver blade, likely the work of assassins. They had also fussed over her, clucking their tongues at her thin frame and the fading bruises that marked her skin. She had never received such gentle attention in her life. It was overwhelming. King Theron watched her, his expression unreadable. He hadn't pressed her, hadn't demanded anything of her since his initial, powerful declaration. He simply observed, his silver eyes seeming to see right through the walls she had built around her heart. She clutched his cloak tighter, the unfamiliar weight and warmth, a strange comfort. Was any of this real? Would she wake up back in her cold, tiny room in the Omega quarters, the whole thing a cruel fantasy? She looked at the man opposite her. The sheer force of his presence was undeniable. This was no dream, but it felt just as fragile. He called her his mate, his queen. But how could he? He knew nothing about her, other than one moment of foolish, impulsive bravery. Once he learned the truth, that she was weak, that her wolf form was small and pale, that she had no family, no status, nothing to offer a king, surely he would change his mind. The fear of a second rejection, one that would surely destroy her completely, was a cold knot in her stomach. The citadel was carved into the heart of a mountain, a breathtaking fortress of black stone and shimmering ice. Towers pierced the clouds, and bridges of silver-lit crystal spanned bottomless chasms. It was a place of power and magic, a world away from the rustic simplicity of her former home. As she was escorted through vast halls lined with stoic guards who bowed their heads to her, she felt smaller and more insignificant than ever. She was given a suite of rooms that was larger than the entire Omega house. A fire blazed in a marble hearth, a four-poster bed was draped in silks and furs, and a balcony overlooked a snow-covered valley that glittered under the stars. The staff addressed her as Luna, their voices filled with a respect that made her flinch. Later that evening, a soft knock came at her door. It was Theron. He was dressed not in armor but in simple black trousers and a tunic, which did little to diminish his intimidating presence. He held a silver tray bearing a steaming bowl of stew and a loaf of bread. "I thought you might be hungry," he said, his voice a low rumble. "The healers said you were malnourished." She stared at the tray, then at him. The Alpha King was bringing her food. You shouldn't," she stammered. "There are servants for that." "I am aware," he said, stepping inside and placing the tray on a small table near the fire. "I wanted to bring it myself. May I join you?" She nodded numbly, perching on the edge of a velvet armchair that felt far too grand for her. He sat opposite her, the firelight playing across the sharp angles of his face. For a long time, they were silent. The only sounds the crackling of the logs and the soft clink of her spoon against the bowl. The stew was rich and savory, the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. "You are afraid of me," he stated finally. It wasn't an accusation. Serenith looked up from her bowl, her heart stuttering. I am not afraid of you, Your Majesty. I am afraid of this. She gestured vaguely at the luxurious room, at the impossible situation she found herself in. I don't belong here. This is a mistake. The moon goddess does not make mistakes, he replied, his voice firm but gentle. And her only mistake regarding you was placing you in a pack of fools who could not appreciate her gift. But I have nothing to give you, she whispered, the old, familiar litany of her worthlessness rising up. I'm an Omega. My wolf is small. I have no family, no power. I am broken. The final word was a choked sob. Theron leaned forward, his silver eyes intense. Serenith, look at me. She forced her gaze to meet his. I have been king for 200 years. I have commanded armies, built kingdoms, and faced down every threat imaginable. I have had countless alphas, betas, and nobles offer me their powerful, well-bred daughters as potential mates. I have wanted none of them. He paused, letting his words sink in. Do you know what I have been searching for all that time? Not power. I have more than enough of that. Not status. I am the king. I have been searching for strength. Not the strength of the body, but the strength of the heart. I have been searching for kindness in a world that is often cruel, for courage in the face of fear, for a light in the darkness. He reached across the small space between them and took her hand. His was large and warm, completely enveloping hers. In that clearing, when I was wounded and surrounded by enemies, you were the only one who showed any of those qualities. You, who had nothing, were willing to give everything to save a stranger. That is not weakness, Serenith. That is the greatest strength I have ever witnessed. That is the strength of a queen. Tears streamed freely down her face now, dripping onto their joined hands. His words were chipping away at the icy walls around her heart, letting in a warmth she had never felt before. Could he be right? Could her compassion, the very thing that had always been scorned as Omega weakness, truly be her strength? I don't know how to be a queen, she confessed, her voice thick with emotion. I will teach you, he promised. Just as you will teach me. You will teach me how to temper my power with mercy. You will be the heart of my kingdom, just as you are the heart of my world. He lifted her hand to his lips and pressed a soft kiss to her knuckles. The choice to accept this bond is yours, and yours alone. I will not force you. But I will spend every day of my life proving to you that you are worthy of it, and so much more. Over the next few weeks, Theron was true to his word. He was a constant, steady presence in her life, but he never pushed. He showed her the citadel, from the roaring forges deep within the mountain to the serene, starlit gardens at its peak. He introduced her to his council, powerful and ancient wolves who looked at her with initial skepticism that slowly turned to respect as they witnessed the king's unwavering devotion. He ate his meals with her, not in the cavernous great hall, but in the quiet of her rooms or in a small private dining chamber. He listened to her. He asked for her opinions on matters of state, from disputes over territory to pleas for aid from starving villages. At first, she was too timid to speak, but he gently encouraged her. She spoke of fairness, of ensuring the weakest were cared for, of mercy for those who made mistakes. He never mocked her ideas. Instead, he implemented them, telling his council that his Luna's wisdom was a blessing to them all. Slowly, tentatively, the ice around Serenith's heart began to melt. The hollow ache of loneliness was replaced by the steady warmth of his presence. The reflection she saw in the mirror began to change. Her cheeks filled out. Her colorless eyes seemed to gain an inner light, and she began to carry herself with a quiet dignity she never knew she possessed. The staff, for the most part, treated her with reverence. Only a few, like the sour-faced head cook, Magra, who was a distant cousin of Cyrilda's, seemed to resent her presence, muttering about upstart Omegas under her breath. Serenith, accustomed to such treatment, simply ignored it. Yet, a sliver of fear remained, a deep-seated insecurity that whispered to her in the dead of night. It was all too good to be true. She was still the rejected Omega. What would happen when she was truly tested? What would happen when she had to face her past? The test came sooner than she expected. A royal decree was sent out, summoning all the vassal alphas of the northern territories to the citadel to renew their oaths of fealty to the king. It was an ancient tradition, one that Theron had not called for in over a decade. It was, she knew instinctively, for her. It was his way of formally presenting her to the world as his Luna Queen. Her stomach twisted into a painful knot when she saw the list of attending packs. Near the bottom, in neat, precise script, were the words, Blackwood Pack, Alpha Roven. The day of the ceremony arrived cold and clear. The great hall of the citadel was a vast, echoing cavern of polished black granite, hung with ancient banners depicting the deeds of Theron's ancestors. A throne of obsidian and silver sat on a raised dais, but today, a second, identical throne sat beside it. For her. She stood in her chambers, staring at the gown that had been laid out for her. It was a masterpiece of silver silk that seemed to shimmer with its own light, embroidered with delicate patterns of frost ferns and moon blossoms. It was a gown fit for a goddess, not for her. The old feelings of worthlessness washed over her, chilling her to the bone. She couldn't do this. She couldn't face them. A knock on the door preceded Theron's entrance. He stopped dead in the doorway, his silver eyes widening as he took in the sight of her in the shimmering gown. "You are," he breathed, his voice thick with awe, "the most beautiful thing I have ever seen." He walked towards her, his own ceremonial armor of blackened steel and silver filigree doing nothing to hide the raw power of his form. He saw the fear in her eyes. "You are trembling," he said softly. "I can't," she whispered, shaking her head. "Theron, I can't face him. When he looks at me, all I can see is the worthless, cursed girl he rejected. I can't be a queen." Theron gently took her face in his hands, forcing her to look at him. "That girl is gone, Serenith. Roven did not destroy her. He forged her. Her pain gave her compassion. Her isolation gave her strength. He did not see the diamond in the rough, and his blindness is his loss and my eternal gain. You are not that girl anymore. You are Serenith, my fated mate, the heart of this kingdom, and my queen. And today, everyone in this realm will know it." He leaned down and pressed his forehead against hers. "I will be beside you. I will not let anyone harm you ever again. Do you trust me?" Looking into the depths of his silver eyes, she felt the last of her resistance crumble. The fear was still there, but now it was overshadowed by a fierce, burning love for the man who had seen her when she was invisible. "Yes," she whispered. "I trust you." "Good," he said, a grim smile touching his lips. "Because today, we settle old debts." He offered her his arm. "Shall we, my queen?" Taking a deep breath, she placed her hand on his arm, and together they walked towards the great hall. When they entered, a hush fell over the assembled alphas. There were dozens of them, powerful and proud leaders of their packs, but their combined presence was nothing compared to the aura of the king. They all bowed as one as Theron led Serenith towards the dais. She kept her eyes fixed forward, not daring to look at the crowd, her hand gripping his arm as if it were a lifeline. She felt it before she saw him. A wave of shock, disbelief, and pure, unadulterated hatred rolling off someone in the crowd. She risked a glance, and her breath caught in her throat. Rovan was there, standing beside Cyrilda. His jaw was hanging open, his face a mask of stunned fury. Cyrilda looked as though she had swallowed poison, her eyes boring into Serenith with a jealousy so potent it was almost a physical blow. They had not been told who the king's new mate was. The shock was complete. Theron seated her on her throne before taking his own. The hall was utterly silent. The king's gaze swept over the assembled alphas, cold and assessing. "I have called you here to renew your oaths," he began, his voice booming through the hall, "and to present to you, my mate, your queen, Luna Serenith." A wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many of them had heard rumors of the incident at the Blackwood Pack, but to see her here, on the throne beside the king, was another matter entirely. One by one, the alphas were called forward by Gideon. They knelt before the dais, swore their fealty to the king, and then, with varying degrees of surprise and deference, swore their fealty to their new queen. Serenith accepted their oaths with a quiet nod, her nervousness slowly being replaced by a burgeoning sense of confidence. Theron's presence beside her was a warm, unshakable mountain. Finally, it was Rovan's turn. He strode forward, his movements stiff with rage. Cyrilda trailed behind him, her face a thunderous scowl. He stopped before the dais, but he did not kneel. He looked only at Serenith, his eyes filled with a possessive, arrogant light. "So," Rovan said, his voice dripping with condescending amusement. The little Omega found herself a new protector. "Tell me, your majesty," he said, turning his sneer on Theron, "did she bewitch you with her unnatural looks?" "You should be careful. My pack cast her out for a reason. Cursed things have a way of turning on you." Gasps of horror echoed through the hall. To insult the king's mate, the chosen of the goddess, was an act of treason. Gideon's hand went to the hilt of his sword, but Theron simply raised a hand, his expression calm, almost bored. It was the terrifying calm of a storm about to break. "You were saying, Alpha Rovan?" Theron prompted, his voice deceptively mild. Emboldened by the king's lack of immediate reaction, Rovan's arrogance swelled. "I am saying that you have picked up my discarded trash. She is mine to do with as I please. She is from my pack, and I am her alpha. She will return with me." He took a step towards the dais, his hand outstretched as if to grab her. "Come here, Serenith. Your games are over." That was when Serenith finally broke, not in fear, but in anger. A pure, cleansing rage burned away the last vestiges of the timid girl she had been. She rose from her throne, her silver gown shimmering like moonlight on water. She looked down at the man who had tormented her, who had broken her, and she felt not a shred of fear, only pity. "No," she said, her voice clear and ringing with a newfound authority that surprised even herself. "I will not. You are not my alpha. You are nothing to me." Rovan stared at her, stunned into silence by her defiance. It was then that Theron chose to act. He did not rise from his throne. He did not shout. He simply let his power, a fraction of his true, overwhelming might, fall upon Rovan. The younger alpha collapsed as if struck by lightning, his face slamming into the granite floor at the foot of the dais. He lay there, twitching and gasping, completely immobilized. Theron looked down at the pathetic form of his rival, his silver eyes glowing with cold, merciless fury. "You are a fool," the king stated, his voice echoing with absolute power. "You speak of curses, yet the only curse I see here is your own ignorance. You speak of strength, yet you preyed on the weakest member of your pack to make yourself feel strong. You speak of rights, but you have none." He let the pressure increase, and a sickening crack echoed through the hall as Rovan's shoulder broke. Cyrilda screamed. "You came into my home," Theron continued, his voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "You insulted my queen. You threatened my mate. And you did it all because your pathetic pride cannot accept that the woman you threw away was worth more than you and your entire bloodline combined. He gestured to Gideon. Seize him. He and his mate will be escorted to the deepest cells. I will decide his pack's fate later. Perhaps they need a new alpha, one who can recognize a diamond when he sees it. Royal guards hauled the whimpering Rovan and the hysterical Cyrilda from the hall. A profound silence remained. Theron turned his gaze back to the assembled alphas, his expression hard as stone. Let this be a lesson to you all. My queen is to be respected. She is to be honored. Anyone who shows her anything less will face my wrath. Do you understand? A chorus of, "Yes, your majesty," filled the hall. Theron's gaze then fell upon Serenith, who was still standing. All the coldness, all the fury, vanished from his expression, replaced by a look of such profound love and pride that it made her heart ache. He rose from his throne and came to her, taking her hands in his. "Are you all right?" he asked softly, for her ears only. She looked at the spot where Rovan had been, at the ghost of her past, now exorcised forever. A single final tear of catharsis traced a path down her cheek. It was not a tear of sadness, but of release. The chains that had bound her for so long had finally been shattered. She was free. "I am now," she whispered, her voice full of emotion. She looked up at him, her heart overflowing. "Thank you." "There is no need for thanks between us," he said. He leaned in, his silver eyes searching hers. The pull of the bond, now unimpeded by fear or doubt, was an irresistible tide. "The choice is still yours, Serenith. But I must know. Do you accept this bond? Do you accept me, as I accept you?" She didn't need to think. She knew the answer in the very core of her being. "Yes," she said, her voice strong and sure. "I choose you, Theron. I accept." A radiant smile transformed his face, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy that made him look younger, less like a mythical king, and more like a man who had just been given the entire world. He lowered his head, and his lips met hers. The kiss was not gentle. It was a cataclysm, a collision of lightning and fire, of lonely darkness and brilliant light. It was the sealing of a bond forged in pain and defiance, a promise of a future she had never dared to imagine. In that kiss, she felt the last broken pieces of her soul mend, fitting together to form something new, something stronger and more beautiful than before. It was the feeling of finally, truly being whole. When they finally broke apart, the entire hall erupted in a deafening roar of approval. The alphas cheered for their new queen. Serenith stood beside her king, her hand in his, no longer a ghost, but a brilliant, shining light. Their official mating ceremony was held a month later under the full moon in the Citadel's starlit garden. She stood before him not as a rejected Omega, but as a confident queen, her white hair and pale skin glowing like spun silver, no longer a mark of a curse, but the revered sign of the goddess's favor. Her life had become a testament to the idea that destiny often lies on the path taken to avoid it. Rovan's rejection had not been her end. It had been the painful, necessary first step on her journey to her true home, to her true mate. She learned to wield her compassion as the powerful tool it was, earning the love and loyalty of her new people. She championed the outcasts, the misfits, and the forgotten, ensuring that no one in their vast kingdom would ever feel as worthless as she once had. Several months later, she stood on her balcony, looking out at the snow-capped peaks. Theron came up behind her, wrapping his strong arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. His hands came to rest protectively over hers, which were clasped over her gently swelling abdomen. Within her, a new life was growing, the heir to the Northern Territories, the future Alpha King. She had returned to her past not just as a queen, but holding the promise of the future in her hands, a future born from courage and kindness. She was no longer the pale omen, the cursed one. She was the Silver Queen, the heart of the king,